wanted to show you a couple of videos of what's been happening in the US overnight. Now, this is the first story I want to show you. It's from MSNBC. I'm not going to show you much of this, but the decision, well, the leaked document of a prospective decision came out, and 2 minutes later, these guys were on air. So that came out, let's say we start at 11 a.m. So at 10:58, the decision came out, or the leaked document came out, and these guys went to air. And I just thought it would be interesting to show you all what literal breaking news about this was when it was within minutes of being released.
We have huge breaking news tonight, and I can't even believe I'm going to tell you what I'm about to tell you, but in a highly, indeed, as far as I can tell, utterly unprecedented leak from the Supreme Court, Politico has obtained what they say is an initial draft majority opinion written by Justice Alito showing the Supreme Court striking down Roe versus Wade. Quote, Roe was egregiously wrong from the start, Alito writes. We hold that Roe and Casey must be overruled, he writes in the document labeled as the opinion of the court. Again, I'm reading from the Politico article. It is time to heed the Constitution and return the issue of abortion to the people's elected representatives. Now, Politico mentions this in a piece. This has never happened before, as far as I know, a draft opinion of the court leaking, A. B, this would be, if true, the most seismic court ruling in 50 years, most likely. Earthquake in the lives of America's women.
I think that we've got a gist for how it came out and what they were talking about it at the start. Here's a few other broadcasters breaking the news story in America yesterday.
Breaking news, an abortion bombshell hitting tonight. Politico publishing a report saying a draft opinion circulated among Supreme Court justices suggests that Roe v. Wade should be overturned.
An initial draft majority opinion written by Justice Alito showing the Supreme Court striking down Roe versus Wade.
I don't want to hear the...
We'll come back to this. This is a TikToker in America as well. She has some interesting things to say about it. Not that TikTok is the bastion of all things informative, but she had an interesting perspective on this. And just so you know, this is the SCOTUS document, and it does indeed say we hold that Roe and Casey, which is another case that strengthened Roe versus Wade, must be overruled. The Constitution makes no reference to abortion, and no such right is implicitly protected by any constitutional provision, including the one on which the defenders of Roe and Casey now chiefly rely. Now, we're going to jump in to have this conversation with Suzanne Manning in a sec, but before we do, what I would say, George, is that at the very start of it, which we showed, people were saying, oh, if this is true, but I think one of the reasons you know it's true now is that supporters of this ban are focusing on how dare this be released rather than focusing on this is not true.
So talking about the leak
on Fox News, that sort of place, are trying to make the story this is an illegal action, that this has been released, rather than make the story we've contacted the courts, this is fake. So I would say at the moment that this is true and this is accurate. It's not law yet. It potentially could be law. There could be changes on the way through to law. But I think that the leak that came out that Politico released yesterday, all evidence shows that it's true and accurate as to where the majority ruling in the Supreme Court is today.
Yeah, and for those of you, those people wondering, and before I jump out for the interview, there's Roe versus Wade is basically the federal protections that sort of, in some way, maybe override state level legislation on abortion. I think I'm right in saying that, Pat, right? So now with the overturn of Roe versus Wade, state legislative and judicial branches, etc., will have much more powers when it comes to reproductive rights and abortion in that state alone. And it shows the power in America that the judicial branch has, and the power, and maybe we'll talk about this later on or tomorrow, the power that that Trump had in installing conservative judges in the Supreme Court.
Yeah. All right, let's welcome to the show now Suzanne Manning. Suzanne is the president of the National Council of Women of New Zealand. Suzanne, thank you for joining us today.
Kia ora. Nice to be here, Peg.
Yeah. Hey, now I know that when we talked this morning, you weren't too much up on the play with the news, which is understandable because it's sort of breaking overnight. But you were watching. We were due to come to you about now, and you got to see the setup as well. So you were watching. Any reactions on what you've just seen?
It's like one step forward, two steps back all the time. It's every time there is a human rights issue that feminism makes a win, somebody comes along later, in this case 50 years later, and tries to overturn it. It's, when does a right become a right that stays instead of people relitigating it all the time?
I guess
my reaction to this.
Unfortunately, in America, people are talking about, in America, that people are talking about how, you get these kind of people at the moment who try and reference the Constitution like it's the Bible, sometimes both figuratively and literally, and that it's unquestionable. But they need to have pointed out to them that that's why they're called amendments, because the Constitution's been changed on the way through. But I guess the thing is, if it's been changed on the way through to give amendments, then it can be changed back, or it can be changed to other things. So when is a right actually a right? I guess within the American context, which is what we're talking about, they have the ability within their laws to go, we can amend whatever it is we're doing. And I think it would appear to me that the situation in America is what they're going to be saying is, we're not banning abortions, we're giving the states the right to decide, because they have this thing called states' rights. And because of that, all the Republican states will ban abortion and all the Democratic states will not. So let's say half of the country, 175 million people, so half of those will be women. So 80 million women, females, because I guess some won't be of reproductive age, will be under a situation where they will not have access to abortions. And I wanted to also bring up a part of your website, and you say very clearly, as a part of the job of the Council of Women, is that you are about safety and health, and one of your criteria is in here are access to healthcare, including abortion. So for those who maybe aren't in this conversation on a daily basis, access to abortion is now accepted as normal healthcare, not like anything beyond that.
That is that's the law at the moment, and that is the position of Te Kaunihira Wahine o Aotearoa, the National Council of Women. We have had many debates on this over many years. We are a representative organisation of women in Aotearoa, so we have a variety of views. We have people who are totally opposed to abortion. We have people who absolutely want it on demand. And so for us to find a position that fairly represents what our members consider should be the case, it has been a long road. But a few years ago we did do this. We wanted it to be seen as a health issue. It is not a criminal issue as far as we're concerned. Abortion is about the health of woman and child, because women and their reproductive systems are something to be taken seriously and to be looked after in as many ways as possible. But we consider that the woman is the best person to know about her own body, her own situation, and to make her own decisions. She needs support. She needs advice and care and support and access. There are so many things about that, but ultimately the National Council of Women believe that it's a woman's right to be supported to look after her own body's needs and the health needs of those within her. So this is a position that all of our members can agree on, even though they wish the ultimate decision maybe to be different depending on your point of view. It's that principle, and it's that principle that Roe versus Wade is basically overturning, saying no, it's not actually a healthcare thing that a woman should decide. This is something that the states will decide for you. For a libertarian, freedom-loving country, it seems a bit weird.
Well, if we've got time afterwards, once we say thanks to you, I've got some other stuff to show, which is basically the stats around who supports abortion in America, and every demographic, it's more than 50%, other than white evangelicals. Every other demographic, and then if you include the white evangelicals into the major population, even with their opposition, it's still for the whole population above 50%. So when you talk about, liberty-loving democracy, this is one of the things I bang on about, is how can you have a democratic country that takes 60% of the view of the population, or 70% or 80%, and then rule against it. It doesn't. And I mean, I'm not saying we go by mob rule. Sometimes the minority view needs to be represented as well. But in this situation, it seems to be a bit of a no-brainer, which is also apparently what the Supreme Court's into, no-brainers.
Yeah.
So
I
wanted to ask.
One point.
Yeah, go.
Can I just make a comment on that the bit that I saw beforehand, that the court is saying it's time to return this to elected representatives. Yet the point of separation of courts and parliament is so that you get the politicking out of fundamental issues like this. Women's health rights shouldn't be mucked around with who's got the most money to buy a politician, which, I might be wrong, but that's my understanding of politics in the States. It costs money to get elected. If you've got money, you control your politicians. So this idea that it is better to go to elected representatives, no, there should be a separation. The principle we're talking about here should be legally enshrined and left there.
I watched a clip once when Jon Stewart was hosting The Daily Show, and I can't remember who he had on, but it was a Republican politician. And they were talking about same-sex marriage. And he was like, and Jon Stewart was like, look, I understand the abortion issue for you guys is more difficult, but he was going, but what's the problem with same-sex marriage? In other words, Jon Stewart was saying that I know the abortion issue is a difficult conversation amongst society, but he was kind of going, but people getting married, no big deal. They're grown adults. So it just made me think while you were talking, why do you think this is such a difficult conversation? The abortion issue seems to be a conversation within society that is perhaps the most, you never bring that up across the dinner table sort of thing for most people. It is the thing. And I believe this in America, that is a single voting issue for a lot of those white Protestants. If you say you're pro-life, then they will vote for you no matter what other horrific thing you've done with your mistress or your gay lover or your tax things or whatever pussy you've grabbed from whatever, in the back of the bus that's been said by a president. They'll forgive all of that if you just say pro-life. I really believe it's a one vote issue for many who are evangelical Christians. And I wonder, why do you think this is such a you may not think it's a difficult conversation from your perspective, but within society, it feels like such a difficult conversation still today.
It always is a difficult conversation because it's emotional things. You get children are taonga. You get the tamariki. You get a baby in your hands, and the emotions that invokes is huge. And so that overlays so much of what we're talking about. People see a baby that has not been born, but they do not see the circumstances that led to that baby's conception. So rape or no rape, it doesn't matter. They do not see the life that baby might have because of being born in a particular situation. It becomes a black and white emotional I love babies thing, whereas actually it is much more nuanced than that, and there are so many more decisions to be made. So the principle is not the life of the baby over everybody else's needs and life, but it's a holistic looking at what is the situation and what is the best for the well-being of all concerned. And that's an issue that the women needs to be making. But we love babies. So it comes in every time. And that's not a bad thing. I mean, babies make themselves adorable. So, hey, they get to live. But at the same time, it's way more complicated. We don't like complicated. That's the other thing. People don't like having difficult conversations. People like a black and white, this is how it's going to be, and I'm right, you're wrong. It's not like that.
Yeah. Hey, finally, and thanks for being with us today. Assuming this gets put in place as new law in America,
Oh, please.
and
No.
how we see America influencing the world. There's that adage that I use a lot: when America sneezes, the world catches a cold, which is not a good analogy to use in the day of COVID, but you know what I'm saying. And you are seeing things like, especially over the last 2 years around COVID, mis and disinformation coming out of America affecting the Western world. You're seeing it in New Zealand. It does impact conversations here. You're seeing politicians pick up some of those talking points that are being used in America and landing, so they use them here. Do you have a fear or a concern that if this passes in America, and it's looking like it would, so let's just hypothetically say it does, that it could have some flow on to New Zealand and influence our laws and what we're doing here? Could it revitalize people on the right to try and change laws in New Zealand or impact us in any way?
I think that happens all the time anyway, and this is only one of the latest things that are happening. We're continually fighting those battles. That's what the National Council of Women does on a day-to-day basis. So I actually have confidence in the people of Aotearoa to be able to have those conversations, to push back against misinformation, to actually converse and listen. I see it more in our politicians than I do in some other countries, where actually debate doesn't often descend into personal attacks. Well, it does do that, but there is also a good bit of actually discussing the evidence, actually discussing the facts, actually discussing what people think. I'm seeing it happen more often, and that gives me hope for the future that we'll be able to withstand this. Sure, there's going to be a pressure come on, but we can also push back against it to have proper conversations. That's all we really need to do. Actually listen to each other and accept that it's not black and white, that there's greys to talk about.
President of the National Council of Women of New Zealand, Suzanne Manning. Suzanne, thanks so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you giving us some time. And also jumping in. I mean, I called you out of the blue this morning. I could have been any rando weirdo with an agenda, but thank you for trusting us and jumping in and being a part of the conversation. Really appreciate it.
And thank you for having me.
All right. Now, look, I'm going to play. We do need to shoot quite quickly here today. Georgia, if you want to jump back in, you're welcome to or not, because I do have an appointment to get to at 1 o'clock. But I think I would just like to finish off this conversation, because one thing that hasn't really come up is the idea of, I said I was going to play the end of this commentary from this TikToker, the idea of the decisions that the American people make for president, how they can impact days like today.
I don't want to hear the phrase elections don't matter anymore. Because look where the 2016 election just got us. A drafted opinion from the Supreme Court was leaked, and it has them overturning Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey. And that's not me speculating, because in the draft, it quite literally says we hold that Roe and Casey must be overruled. And instead, it says it is time to heed the Constitution and return the issue of abortion to the people's elected representatives. AKA, it would no longer be a constitutional right, but would allow for the disgusting states of Texas, Oklahoma, Mississippi, pretty much every state in the South.
Just purely for the time, we'll let that go and just get it. But the point that she made at the start, I think, is something that's worth thinking about, especially for Americans. It's different here in New Zealand because we have a different system, but because the president basically nominates the justices and then the Senate and Congress choose to steal one off Obama, then you're put in this situation where it does really, truly impact. And I mean, if this is on the block now, Roe versus Wade, then anything's on the block. And it means that literally for the next 10, 20, 30 years, a conservative justice, a conservative court, Supreme Court in America, which swings conservative, could actually very, very, very rapidly change the could absolutely change how America runs, what America is, and make it. So the point that she made, which I thought was interesting, and I wanted to sort of acknowledge it, was it just goes to show how important that presidential elections are for Americans, because it can lead to days like today.
One thing I'll say before we go is that there's been this interesting sort of line of attack. Well, it's very common for when things like this happen. We see Democrats they blame people like Bernie or Susan Sarandon or something like this, right, for not voting for Hillary or damaging Hillary, because then we would have won the Democrats would have won in 2016, would have people in the Supreme Court, to your point you've just made. And the problem with that is the Democrats love to attack the left rather than their enemies, the Republicans who actually make these changes in the Supreme Court. But the other point is that there's been massive Democratic majorities where they could have codified laws like Roe versus Wade with their massive support that, for example, Obama had, a huge legislative majority and did nothing when it came to this or Planned Parenthood or that sort of thing. So when people see people criticizing, Susan Sarandon for not voting for Hillary Clinton as the reason that shit like this happens, just keep that in mind and maybe think to yourself, why are the Democrats and the liberals always so quick to blame things like this on the left rather than the right, the people who are actually doing it?
Yeah. I said I was going to get to some research and stuff, which I said I've got to shoot off today a bit quickly. But look, this is, if you look up Forbes.com, maybe I'll try and put this in my Twitter feed today, but there is information all the way down this about all sorts of partisan splits all the way through. But the headline, the top line says this: broad support for abortion rights. Gallup poll shows Americans support for abortion in all or most cases at 80% in May of 2021, only slightly higher than 1975, which was 76%. And the Pew Research Center finds 59% of adults believe abortion should be legal compared to 60% in 1995. Though there have been some fluctuation with support dropping to a low of 47 in 2009. So broad support for this across the board. It is, as we said, one of those conversations that does get tricky and difficult, and I'm not entirely sure why. Well, I do kind of know why, but I don't think it should.